Welcome everyone to this online program of the American Writers Museum. My name is Allison Sansoni and I'm the program director here at the museum in Chicago, where we're now open. Just a few short housekeeping things before we begin tonight and as everyone's coming in. As you're watching the program, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring that, and at the end, we'll ask as many questions as we have time for. We may not get to everyone's, but we will absolutely do our best, and we apologize in advance if we're not able to get to all of the questions. If you like the kinds of online programs that you're seeing from us in the past several months, you can become a member and get advance notice of special programs and offers, including lots of good things to keep you busy during this very strange time that we're in. Our YouTube channel has videos posted of programs from the past 3 years. You can check that as well for news and updates. Our book selling partner, when we're here and when we're open in person, is Seminary Co-op Bookstore. And we'll put a link into the chat once we really get started here, where you can order a copy of the book that's going to be discussed tonight. We're grateful to all of you for being here and for valuing the past, present, and future of American writing. Tonight, we're really looking forward to hearing from a writer whose latest book was recently described by the New York Times as having a long conversation with someone who is telling you something important, telling you something very important, but is telling it in a very quiet voice. You have to really pay attention. Be assured, however, that the experience will be worth it. Sigrid Nunez is the author of the novels Salvation City, The Last of Her Kind, A Feather on the Breath of God, for Rowena, and the National Book Award winning The Friend, among others. She's also the author of Sempre Susan, a memoir of Susan Sontag. She has been the recipient of several awards, including a Whiting Award, the Rome Prize in Literature, and a Berlin Prize Fellowship. She lives in New York City. She's joined tonight by Charlotte Wood, who's the author of 6 novels and 2 books of nonfiction. Her 2016 novel, The Natural Way of Things, won the Stella Prize, the Indie Book of the Year, and Novel of the Year. Her 2020 book, The Weekend, is an international bestseller, shortlisted for the Stella Prize, and longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award. We're very happy to have you both here with us tonight, and I'm going to welcome you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Allison.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As you've heard, my name's Charlotte Wood, and I am coming to you from the coast just north of Sydney in Australia. It's just after 9:30 in the morning here. It's really just an absolute honor for me to be here talking with Sigrid Nunez tonight for you about her really profound and extraordinary novel, What Are You Going Through? And I'm a huge fan of Sigrid's work, so I leapt out of my skin when I was invited to have this conversation. I want to start, Sigrid, by asking you about, I've heard you say that this novel sort of grew out of The Friend, your previous novel, the National Book Award winner. I wondered if you could talk a little about how this happens, how one book sort of seeds another book. Is it a matter of following the voice, I wondered?
I think it's very much a matter of following the voice. And in fact, it wasn't, it wasn't planned. I didn't think, it's time to start a new book. I want it to be like The Friend. I want to have the same voice as The Friend. I want it to be, to be something that seems to flow naturally out of that. However, when I did start writing it, early on, I recognized that it was the same voice and the same tone as The Friend, but then I didn't think about it anymore. I mean, I just carried on, and by the time it was finished, when I thought about the 2 books, I thought, well, this is certainly not a sequel, but the books are very similar, and I guess the most important thing would be that I felt that it is very much the same narrator, and that the way the narrator in What Are You Going Through sees the world and behaves and thinks about things and expresses herself are the way that the narrator of The Friend would also, even though they're not having the same experiences. They are separate characters, but the same narrator to some extent, if you know what I mean, if that's possible.
Yeah, it's very much the similar sensibility, I guess.
Yes.
So the title, What Are You Going Through, which is also used in the epigraph of the book, is from the French philosopher Simone Weil, who's one of the things that Simone Weil is famous for saying is that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And this, could you tell us about that statement that Simone Weil made, and how, at what point did you know that that was going to form sort of the spine of the book, or the central idea of the book?
Well, I knew early on because I had this title from the beginning, and the title was taken from that quote. The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say, what are you going through? Which is from one of her essays that I read in a collection called Waiting for God, a really long time ago, and it always stayed with me. So you could say in a sense that I began the book with something like that in my head, and then that was almost the inspiration for the book. And I don't know, I mean, to me, it just seemed to be a simple statement, perfectly expressed about something that, that is absolutely true. That definition.
So, simple, but extremely morally complex. Asking the question is one thing, but listening to the answer is the point.
Right, because what you quoted, attention, the question of attention, and she had also has said that, attention is a form of prayer. Mm-hmm. As well. And in this case, she's talking about attention that would be focused on some kind of work. I mean, not on listening to another person, but on doing some kind of work with full attention. Reading with full attention is a kind of prayer. Mm. So I as I say, I was just very taken by that, and I thought that, since she's talking about the love of our neighbor, what she really meant was, people in general, strangers, basically, mm-hmm. I just thought it was a way to, I had this idea to have a kind of chorus of voices. And, some people have asked, well, why isn't there a question mark? Mm-hmm. There is in her, in her essay, of course. But to me, it was like, it's not that kind of question. It's not like, what are you going through? Like, what's up? Or what's happening? I thought of it more of a statement, as in, I know you're going through something because you're a human being. Mm. So tell me, what are you going through? It doesn't have to be even asked as a question. It's an assumption that you're going through something. And again, as you say, the implication is you don't just ask the question. The whole point is that you're asking it because you're actually going to listen with full attention to the answer. So another way of putting it would be, talk to me. I'm here, talk to me.
Well, there are lots of conversations through this book, some overheard, some had by the narrator. I want to talk about the response, the listening response that people give to people in pain. So one of the things, so our audience may know already that at the heart of this book is a friendship between the narrator and a very old friend. The old friend's cancer treatment has not worked, and she has asked the narrator to be with her through the last phase of her life. But another of the troubles that the friend is going through is a sort of fractured relationship with her daughter. I wondered if you could talk a little about that, and about how one of the difficulties for her is that people don't really believe the truth of her experience with her daughter. You know, they don't think that relationship is what she thinks it is.
It's true. It's it didn't have to happen this way, but somehow it did happen this way. That in this particular case, there's a mother and an only child who's a daughter, and the father has never been in the picture, and these two have never managed to get along, and there's always been this blame. The daughter has it fixed in her head that her father would have loved her, that she's never even met her father, or that it's her mother's fault somehow that the father isn't there. And then the mother doesn't really know how to deal with the hostility of the girl while she's growing up. And so they just become more and more alienated from each other, and are never able to repair things. They never heal. And this is one of those situations where other people don't want to believe that, so they don't listen. I mean, to them, they poo-poo it the way they people do so many things when it's the other person's problem, and they say, no, she loves you. All children love their mothers, they say that. So you can be assured of that. But it really isn't so. Her daughter does not have that kind of feeling, and then the narrator, is always kind of chilled by the way her friend talks about her daughter, saying things like, well, if I wish I'd had another child, which can be taken two ways. I wish I had a second child, or I wish I'd had a different child. And that's very painful. And also, she says that she's always felt that there was something foreign about this child, that, centuries ago she would have believed that the child was a changeling. So I just wanted to explore that, because I have seen that kind of thing in families, which is why the narrator says, one of the most famous lines in 20th century literature is the beginning of Ford Madox Ford's The Good Soldier. This is the saddest story I have ever heard. And she says, I often think of that line, especially when I'm thinking about certain kind of troubled families, because it just, it shouldn't be that way. Families should be happy, and when there's this kind of lifelong trouble, it's tragic, really.
And that tussle also speaks to something that comes in later when the friend talks about being in a cancer support group, and there's another story of another woman in the group who speaks about her marriage in a way that the people in the group can't accept in the same vein.
Yeah, it's very similar, in fact. I mean, yes, in that group, when it's all of the people in the group have cancer, it's a cancer support group. They're not all terminal like the narrator's friend, but she joins the group around the same time as another woman, and this woman tells her story, which is extremely sad, and yet another saddest story I have ever heard. About her husband's response to her cancer, and it's everything that people don't want to hear in a situation like that, and it's everything that you don't know what to say to. But my narrator's friend is so upset by the fact that everyone tells this woman, you must be wrong. you're just seeing, and her children have also, and her grown children have also told her that. Everyone has told her that she's misreading this. She knows that she's not misreading it. And so what happens then, by not allowing her to have her real feelings, they're not supporting her at all. They're doing the very opposite. And and the narrator's friend who's there in the group, she feels so bad about this that she doesn't go back herself, because she feels so guilty. And she often thinks about it, and she wonders about it, because that woman, was terminal. And when she died, whether she just wonders whether anyone ever really listened or saw her before she died.
Which is such a
yes.
tragic thing, to make her be so alone. So we're talking about some very sad things in this book, but one of the manifestations of your exceptional skill is the way that you're able to tell these very stark truths, I think, about some very painful things, and yet it never feels desolate or bleak or unrelenting. There's something about the way that you write that prevents a kind of miserable pall over all this very sad stuff. So one of the ways that I think you do this is through a kind of playfulness and a humour that is always through your writing. What does a sense of humour do for a writer, even if the material isn't funny?
Well, I think it's really for the reader. When I teach, I try to explain to the students, it's not about you, it's about the reader. And the writer has to be a seducer in a certain way. You're there to please the reader. You're there to give something to the reader, and to present something that was unrelentingly bleak and heavy and miserable and so on. I don't want to give that to the reader. I want the reader to have something else to be engaged by. And so in this particular case, I do early on say that one of the characters, the friend, who is the one who's dying, has always used humor to help her deal with difficult situations. And so I had to, I had to make some humor. And in other books where I haven't done that with a character, I've always wanted to have some kind of lightness in it. So that's also the way I think and see things. So so it comes naturally to me to include something like that. But particularly in this kind of situation, I think that you're writing about real life experience, and it just happens to be true that there is no experience that doesn't have some comic element to it. That's the way people are. Everyone will know what I'm talking about who's been going through this pandemic. How many funny things came to your inbox about the pandemic? How many really good jokes and memes and videos, and all kinds of extremely funny things. Because if they hadn't come, we would have all been shocked. Because it's always part of things, no matter how grim. But as I say, I really, I really do think about the reader and what the experience of reading is like. And I think that element of lightness and playfulness has to be there. And finally, I'll say that I do in this book, I do bring these two women together. They're hanging out together. And, when I hang out with my friends, we do laugh a lot. We do, I recognize my friends and myself in these situations that they're in, the kind of funny things that get said and the playfulness that you're talking about. It's always there. It's always there. That's why I love my friends. I mean, it's just part of the way part of the way we see things and talk and socialize together. It's always there.
It's beautiful. Let's talk about animals for a second. You have animals in your work a lot of the time. That's very clear from obviously Apollo, the Great Dane in The Friend, and Leonard Woolf's marmoset monkey, Mitz, to the Airbnb cat in this book, which is also allowed its own story. It's one of the saddest stories I've ever heard. And the cat tells the story, which is just a kind of surprising and delightful leap made in the narrative, I think. Why are animals important to write about, and how do they carry meaning for humans, do you think?
Well, partly they give me the opportunity for that playfulness that you're talking about and for that lightness. Not everybody, but many, many, many people like to read about animals. And in a lot of the kinds of books that the kind of reader that I'm thinking of reads, that they don't get to do that. The animals are excluded. So anytime I read about a dog or somebody's friendship with a dog, I've always been delighted. I mean, Ackerley's My Dog Tulip is one of the greatest books I've ever read. A book I've read, more than once. Just and that has has many, many admirers. But I just think that's me. I do love animals and always have, and kind of regret that I haven't had them more in my life and also in my fiction. I love. I mean, writing is a lot about observing things and then trying to describe them or explore them. And I love observing animals. I find animals fascinating, beautiful, fascinating, incredibly interesting. And I discovered that lots and lots of other people share that. I know that there are some people who don't like animals, for example, and I am not judging them, but I do find that very strange. I just do, only because they seem so likable to me. They're so lovable, and they're so I mean, even just to watch like a documentary or something about that, and I think they're wonderful on the camera. They're on screen. They're wonderful in on the page. So as I say, that's just I'm glad that I actually decided that it could happen. With The Friend, I had always wanted to write a book that had an animal that was an important character, not one that was a narrator that spoke, but I did, and I felt it really had to be a dog because that's the really special bond, that canine human bond. Now the cat in What Are You Going Through has a really small role. But I've discovered that small as that role is, that has really captivated people. There isn't anyone. There are many things in the book that have not yet been mentioned, anywhere. But the cat is never forgotten, and the cat seems to be really, a little bit of a star, a scene stealer.
And it's also a lovely way of continuing this attention, right, to all things, not even just humans. I was really fascinated to hear you speak recently about what I think you referred to as your linear way of writing, that you start at page 1 and you write for, say, 20 pages, and then you would go back and revise that and revise it, and then go back to page 20 and write the next bit and then revise it. So is this returning a sort of generative process as well for the next bit, or is it purely about sort of perfecting what you've done already?
Well, I try to get that whatever section I'm working on, as good as I possibly can before I move on. so that then as I go back each time, I make some changes. So, but it's always kind of a, a polishing thing. I really have to have things very finished before I can move on. That's really part of it. And because of that, when the book is finished, it really is finished. I don't then go back and make all kinds of changes. And it's just what works for me, that kind of one foot in front of the other, and that kind of groping forward intuitively, because it means that everything that happens in the book comes out of what I've been living with for a long time before. As opposed to the kind of writer who has to have the ending, has to have an outline, has to have certain kinds of notes and about each character and that, and then kind of constructs it out of all these different parts. That would be very difficult for me. If for some reason, somebody said, well, the next novel you have to write it in this other way, it would be very, very hard for me. So this is my tried and true method, and it's what makes me feel most comfortable. It's so simple. It's part of the reason.
But so when you're doing the polishing, is it sort of a deepening as well, or is it purely about the language?
It could be some deepening, but it has a lot to do with improving the sentences, making everything more precise, and also having an idea. I might when I might be at page 60, but then I go back to the first 10 pages as I'm moving along. And then I think of something that I hadn't thought of when I was writing them, or the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, 60th draft. But here suddenly I have, some image or something that I want to add. So it is a certain amount of revision. But the basic structure and ideas and and action or whatever, the basic elements are going to already be there before I move on. Or I might discover something that stands out as not true anymore, and I might take it out.
Interesting. I want to ask you about what seems, as when you're reading your work, a very natural sort of slide between reality and invention. I know the events of the book with the friend have not happened to you, and in the same way you didn't inherit a dog, for the book, The Friend. And yet, as I'm reading it, everything about the voice and the material just feels so absolutely true. It feels that there's no artifice whatsoever. How do you do this? How do you make it feel as if it's literally the truth of your experience on the page? Because there must be shaping and artifice that does happen.
Well, I'm a very good liar, I guess. Well, I am, I guess. I can make things that are untrue sound very true. But to be more serious, there's another important reason. It's true that the books are written as if they were autofiction. I mean that because, and they're not. It's true. They're absolutely not. They what happens in them is completely made up. But I think that I wrote my very first book like this, and that was published in 1995. So I've always had this in me. This has always been a way that I think, write, and feel. It's partly, of course, it's a first-person narrator, and I give that narrator certain things that I myself have. She's female. She writes. She teaches. She's my age, let's say. And then there isn't great distance between the narrator's sensibility and my own sensibility. So when I'm writing about the way she sees things and remembers things, and and maybe brings up a quote, a movie she saw. I mean, if I bring up that the narrator brings up that she saw a movie, that's not invented.
Mm.
I saw that movie, and so there are these almost essayistic parts, and they're clearly, I mean, I think anyone would really know reading that yes, that, you know, the author saw the movie, not just the narrator. And when you see that happening many times, and it does, you know, she says, at the end of such and such book, someone says, well, you know, I wouldn't know that if I hadn't read the book. So if that happens often enough, that then when I come to a point and say that there's this dog in my house, you believe it because you believed the other things. Or in this case, I say my friend, you know, I go to visit my friend in the hospital. Well, that doesn't sound very far-fetched. That sounds like something so likely. And then I think that that's another part of it. What I write about is very likely. You know, it's the kind of experiences that we all have. You know, I mean, as opposed to writing about something, you know, very far-fetched, even if it's realistic. I think that's really why.
I think that's, and part of the reason the book affects people so strongly too, I think it's because we do recognize these experiences. It feels like I'm having this experience, which is a sign of great writing, obviously. I'm going to, in about 10 minutes, we'll go to audience questions, but I have a couple more to ask you before then. I'm just letting the audience know so they can start thinking about and typing some questions into the Q&A box. Another thing you said recently is that you like to have a narrow frame, I think you said. You like not having too many choices when you're starting a book. What did you mean by that? Well,
you know, again, it's a little bit like my method of writing, which is actually, you know, very straightforward and simple. You know, I have this idea that, you know, I'm always looking at someone's life in my books. And, you know, very often it's somebody in an extreme situation of some kind, you know, combat nurse in Vietnam, or somebody who has a terminal illness, or someone who's lost both parents in a flu pandemic. But I have this, but they're in extreme situations, but they're always ordinary people. I mean, they're not supermodels or presidents or, you know, anything like that. You know, I have this idea that if you look very, very closely at one life and in a certain way, you're writing about everyone's life. And, you know, so I want things to be narrowed down to a certain, you know, to kind of, you know, home in on something that can be about the wider world, but I don't want to include too many elements. You know, you know, I want to be kind of economical, you know, almost in the way that poetry is. I don't want a lot of different scene making and descriptive writing and lots of characters and events. I really just like to have that very narrow focus because you know, I have this idea that you know, I want to go deep rather than broad. And it is true that if that I feel that already if you're writing, you have too many options. I mean, you can start a book about absolutely anything. You can write it in any person. You can make it comic or tragic or have all kinds of things. I mean, you have incredible freedom to write about whatever. It can be autobiographical or completely fanciful. And I find that really overwhelming. And so I really just want to have something that allows me to be quiet and still with it and go deep with it rather than, you know, doing a great deal of research and having and experimenting in all different ways and having, I mean, I have written books that have been, you know, much denser, like The Last of Her Kind, and I have written books where I've had to do a lot of research, like writing about the nurse in Vietnam, and I loved that research. But again, even there, you know, it was about the war, it was about coming home from the war, it was about nursing, but it was about one woman's experience, and another woman observing her and thinking about her. So, you know, that's like, you know, imagine whatever I would try to write next, it would be the same thing. I would have the same idea about starting out like that.
I'm going to go to probably my last question, and before audience questions, but it's a kind of big one. Do you know why you write?
Do I know I write? You know, I write because I've always wanted to write, for one thing, since childhood. And that desire to write came from reading. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do what writers did, that I read, writers that I read, storytelling, inventing things. But I also write because I feel when I do that I'm doing what I should be doing. It's you know, it is it's me being me, and I recognize that from a really, really early age. And you know, if I'm not writing, I don't feel like myself. The writing, even though it can bring difficulties into your life, anything worth doing is hard. But it does make me happy. It does bring me a lot of pleasure, and you know, and something that I've said before, and that you know, I have heard, you know, people repeating it back to me and asking me about it, is that I really do believe that that writing is this wonderful way of being a part of the world and being out of the world at the same time. So, I mean, you're able to be solitary and just you and the work, which is something that I love. But you are also, you know, part of a community. You're always assuming somebody's reading you. So that, you know, that is why.
Thank you. I'm going to call up the audience questions now, and you can type them into the chat box. So and I have plenty more if we run out, but we have a question from Shari, who says, you said you polish as you go along, and I believe you said you don't start with an outline or character notes. How much do you know about your book when you start, and how do you keep it organized?
Oh, that's a very good question. I know almost nothing about the book when I start, which is also the way I like to do it. And then it's easy to keep it organized if you're doing it linearly. That's just the point. I would feel so disorganized if I had the character notes and the outlines. That would not, you know, this way you don't move on until you have what you have. And then as you move on, you know more and more. And your options narrow. Okay, so, but that's good because it forces you to focus. So ideas come to you while you're writing. You know, that's true of any writer. So as I'm, you know, because when you're writing, you're thinking. And so there I'm working on these pages, I'm writing, I'm thinking, and then I start to think, oh, I you know what could happen next? Oh, you know what could happen further down the line? I might even think, you know how this could end? And maybe by the time I come to the end, I can't use that thought anymore. But, you know, that's the thing, is you're writing in that way, you're always thinking, and ideas are always going to come to you. And for me, it's the simplicity of it that, you know, that makes the organizing, you know, not really very difficult.
Mm.
And I might, I mean, I would say I might also, as I'm moving along, I will also keep notes, make a few notes, so that I don't forget an idea that I had for further down the road.
Thank you. We have a little note from Joan Giroux, who says, "Your friends love you too." Again, reference something you said about. She's obviously a friend.
Yes. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Okay, Anne Giardini says, very kindly, both of you are brilliant about how women speak to and among each other. Do you keep notes of what you hear or overhear? Do you read your dialogue out loud to yourself in draft and final versions?
I don't take notes. I think this is interesting because writers are always told to keep a notebook, and I resist it, and I've always resisted it. And part of it is a kind of laziness. I want to be out there doing things. I don't want to take notes. It's too much trouble. I mean, seriously, I just want to be in the experience. I don't want to be taking notes about it. I do have I have had a good memory. And I feel like, well, if it was important enough, I'll remember it. If I don't remember it, then I've lost it. But I also think I like the idea of keeping my memory strong and therefore not taking notes. So I will remember conversations. I will, and then I'm writing fiction, so I don't have to remember them perfectly. I can remember some idea about them and then invent the rest. I do eavesdrop. I do overhear things. And then I will, remember them too without taking notes. What was the end? Was there some other part of that question? I don't recall.
It was, do you read your dialogue out loud to yourself?
That was also a good question. More laziness. I tell my students, read your work out loud. Everybody, that's such a good thing to do, particularly your dialogue. And then I just don't. It's wonderful advice. Everybody knows this is some of the best writers' advice is to read your work out loud. And then I mean to, and then I'm like, I'm not. I don't feel like it. So I just have to then trust my ear.
Well, one of the great things about being a writer is that you can do what you want with your own book, right?
That's what I mean.
A question from Shanti. This is a question for Sigrid. How has your writing process and subject matter evolved and changed over the course of your career? I feel that fiction allows us to empathize and get a window into another person's life. When did you know that you wanted to write fiction? I think you said from when you were small. But how has your process changed over your career?
I really don't think it has changed all that much. For example, when I finished The Friend, which came out in 2018, it came out in 2018. Once I finished it, I thought, well, this came out of my first book, which was published in 95, as I said. Certain things that have always been obsessions of mine, they're in the first book, they're in the last book. And I've always written all of my books, as I say, in this linear fashion. And I've always had this sort of same relationship to my work as a writer. So I don't really think, except in the obvious way that, you get older, certain things get easier, certain other things get harder, but certainly there's there are many ways in which when I'm writing, I realize that I'm not making the kinds of mistakes I used to make. Now, or I'll stop before I make that mistake. In other words, like in an earlier book, I would have done something that wasn't working, and I would keep trying, and I wouldn't know how to fix it, and it would take forever to fix it. Now I catch that much earlier. I know what's going on. I know what the problem is, and I know how to fix it, which might sometimes mean just cut it. So I think you know, I think you know, I'm more fluent than I used to be, I would say. I don't need as many drafts. I know what's happening in the work better.
Does that mean you find it easier now?
I think I do find it easier. I do find it easier. And it really has something to do with having learned having learned from the practice of writing all these books and teaching. I've learned what works and what doesn't work. You know, it's clearer to me than in the first or second or third book, for sure. But as far as sensibility goes, that, you know, that really hasn't changed. My attitude towards my work and my sensibility haven't really changed.
We have a question from Pamela. Oh, it's just vanished. Pamela Malpass. Oh, sorry, Pamela. Your question just... Oh, it's back. On the idea of writing fiction that is almost autofiction, but is not autofiction, of inhabiting or channeling a character so that narrating from that voice is entirely natural, does this affect what Sigrid Nunez reads while she's writing?
No, because I just I read whatever I want to read when I'm writing. It's true that I might be at a certain point and think, oh, this reminds me of such and such a book. Maybe I should go and look at that again. But I will just, you know, I read all the time, and I read what I like, and sometimes I teach literature courses and make up what I hope are interesting lists. So I certainly have read a certain amount of autofiction and like it a great deal. But I like other kinds of writing also very much, other kinds of fiction. So
you don't go to certain styles of books that will give you something for your style of book at the time. You're just reading around as usual.
No, I mean, except that, as I say, if there's something in particular, maybe even if I'm struggling a bit, and I might think, well, I know what I wanted here. Now let me think of who got that right. And I might go and take a look at it. But I wouldn't. I would be a little bit nervous about, you know, about reading too much while I was, you know, in progress of any kind of, you know, overload of any particular kind of book, because I'd be afraid it would get too much into my own work.
Look, this is probably going to have to be our last question. This is from Maisie. Hi, Maisie. This is a question for Sigrid and Charlotte. Both of your books deal with the topic of aging, and in particular female aging, in a very candid and refreshing way. Do you hope that the way we approach the topic of age will change from reading books like What Are You Going Through? And Maisie kindly refers to mine as well.
Why don't you answer that?
Oh,
first?
I think this is your event, Sigrid, but
It was a question for both of us, though.
yeah, I suppose when I write, it's for me to understand something, not for me to tell people something, if that makes any sense. So I feel like I'm understanding something about female aging when I wrote The Weekend, which is a book about three friends in their 70s and their friendship. And it was actually centrally for me about the friendship more than the aging. It was about long-term friendship and how that was possible to sustain. But I'm interested in that this is a long-term friendship that is at the heart of What Are You Going Through as well. The women are older.
Well, this is that kind of friendship that they were you know, really close friends in college, and then many years went by and they've stayed in touch, and sometimes they've been closer or less than close, but at the time of what's happening in the book, they haven't really seen much of each other. Then one woman gets ill, and the friend goes to visit her in the hospital, and from there on they become closer and closer. But I couldn't agree with you more, Charlotte. I never think about when I'm writing about how anything I write is going to, you know, change anybody's opinion about anything. You know, I'm always quoting the famous Chekhov line, it's not the writer's job to solve the problem, but to state it precisely. I wouldn't want to have that in my head that I'm trying to, make other people understand or change. And good Lord, people don't change anyway.
Oh, that's another topic for another long conversation. Look, we're going to have to wrap up, and I'm sorry there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, but I just wanted to say that at the beginning of What Are You Going Through, there's an incredibly poignant line delivered by the man who gives the lecture about climate change. And he says that our only chance at redemption now lies in learning how to love and forgive one another as best we can, and to learn how to say goodbye. And I think there's probably no more summation of this majestic, beautiful book than those lines. And thank you so much, Sigrid, for talking with me today.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm delighted to have had this conversation with you.
Thank you to both of you for being here tonight and for giving us such a wonderful program about writing and about this fantastic book. We really